Another day, another GPU launch that doesn't really exist. But that's okay, we're gonna talk about it anyway. Today, the RTX 3070 Ti has launched, or at least the embargo's lifted, and we're gonna benchmark it. Well, I already benchmarked it. We're gonna talk about the results, how it stacks up against the RTX 3070, just underneath it, as well as the 3080, 3080 Ti, and the 3090. Pricing comes in at, none of this matters, oh well, comes at, MSRP is $599, $100 more than the RTX 3070 just beneath it. We're gonna find out once and for all if that extra $100 is actually worth whatever extra performance the 3070 Ti is capable of putting out over its smaller brother. I actually have it here on the test bed. We'll take a quick look at the cooler itself. Nothing new here. It's a very familiar design. Let me brighten this up for you. So there is something to note here though. It is using the same cooler as the 3080, not the 3070. An important distinction. So like the 3080, it's using the flow-through design. There's actually a fan on the opposite side of this card that's blowing air right through that fin stack. This is actually really important to note. If you guys watched the iQnix build that I did recently, which is a small form factor mini ITX case right here, I actually ran into an issue trying to put a 3080 FE in here because of that flow-through design. With the fan at the back side of the GPU, it was actually being choked completely by the case, by the actual panel that's in between, separating the case into two chambers, and so I wasn't able to use that. I had to swap it out for a more standard cooler, or a card with a more standard cooler, like the RTX 3070 right here, where it's got both fans on one side of the card and doesn't need to be completely free on the back side where the backplate is. So that is an important distinction. Apart from that though, it's pretty standard. You get the dual 8-pin connectors going to the single 12-pin from NVIDIA. The adapter is included with the card, of course. Acoustics are about in line with what you might expect from the RTX 3070 or the RTX 3080. I didn't really notice much of a difference. It stays pretty quiet. In my testing though, it did run slightly warmer than the RTX 3070. It was actually much closer to the 3080 in terms of temperatures, hitting a maximum of 78°C, whereas the RTX 3080 hit 77°C. So it was actually a touch warmer, but that could be margin of error. I wouldn't put too much weight on that. Whereas the RTX 3070 non-Ti hit a maximum temp of 72°C. So it actually did stay quite a bit cooler. It does have a higher TDP than the 3070 at 290 watts, and it's recommended that you use a 600 watt power supply for this card, although I would actually recommend bare minimum 650 watts, because the max power draw that this card pulled, along with the whole system actually, was 521 watts from the wall. In my opinion, that's just a little too close to 600 watts. I mean, bear in mind that, you know, I could have done the test again and it could have hit well beyond 521 watts, or a different user might experience higher power usage just depending on their build and a number of other factors, and power supplies aren't always operating at 100% efficiency. So you want to bear that in mind. Again, 600 watts is probably fine if you already have an existing power supply at that wattage, but if you were building a new system from scratch, I would certainly recommend slightly higher than that. With 650 watts, you should be totally good. Here's a quick look at the test bench we're using. A Ryzen 9 5900X running bone stock, being cooled by a 280mm Be Quiet Pure Loop AIO. We have 16 gigs, oh no wait, I think that's 32 gigs, 2x16 gig sticks of Corsair Vengeance Pro RGB DDR4 3600 speed on top of an X570 Aorus Master from Gigabyte, and we're booting off an NVMe SSD, I forget which one, but doesn't really matter, and a Gigabyte Extreme 1200 watt power supply that's somewhere down there. All right, and time for benchmarks. Before we continue, special thanks to Morning Brew for sponsoring this video. Morning Brew is a free daily newsletter that gets you up to speed on business news in just 5 minutes. Unlike traditional news, which tends to be a bit dry and boring, Morning Brew articles are witty, relevant, and informative, which makes learning about current events more enjoyable than ever. Add it to your morning routine for a fresh alternative to aimlessly browsing social media while learning something new every day. For example, I just learned Jeff Bezos is launching himself into space next month, and someone's already bid $2.8 million to sit next to him for the 11-minute space flight. That's $250,000 per second, just to go somewhere that doesn't have prime shipping. If you're interested in business, finance, or tech, Morning Brew is completely free and only takes a few seconds to subscribe. Click the link in the description below and subscribe to Morning Brew today. All right, let's take a look at the benchmarks here. So in the RTX 3080 Ti review that I did recently, I was really surprised how many of you guys said that you actually preferred the spreadsheets over the bar graphs, which is totally fine by me. It's quicker to do it this way. I think it just makes sense. So we're just gonna do it this way. Starting with Firestrike Ultra, the RTX 3070 Ti scored a graphics score of 8,985 and an overall score of 9,239 versus the RTX 3070 scoring 8,381 and 8,600 10,639 respectively, with the RTX 3080 getting 10,655 and 10,951 on the overall score. So right out of the gate here, the RTX 3070 Ti seems pretty well positioned right in between the 3070 and the 3080. It looks like it's more or less right in the middle. But then we go over to TimeSpy and we're getting kind of a different story here, with the RTX 3070 Ti getting a graphics score of 14,000, about 14,500, and an overall score of nearly 14,000. And if you look at the 3070 and 3080 scores, you can see that the 3070 Ti is definitely leaning more towards the RTX 3070, which I would imagine makes sense. I mean, even before I did my testing, I already assumed that the 3070 Ti would be closer in performance to the 3070 than the 3080. Just looking at the specs, it's using the same die as the RTX 3070, and that's kind of reflected here, I think, in TimeSpy. And you go over to Port Royal, and we kind of get the same deal here. RTX 3070 Ti with a score of 8,648 versus 8,198 on the RTX 3070, and 11,271 on the RTX 3080. So again, we're leaning more towards the smaller GPU with the synthetic test in 3D Mark. Let's move on to games though. Games. So I tested 6 different AAA titles, both at 1440p and 2160p, the first title being Ashes of the Singularity, and our RTX 3070 Ti got a 1% low of 51 frames per second and an average FPS of 99. That is actually lower than both the RTX 3080 and the 3070. I thought that was kind of odd. Definitely was an anomaly though, as you're about to see. This was the only game where it underperformed compared to the 3070. At 4K, the results look a bit more normal, with the RTX 3070 Ti getting a 1% low of 46 and an average FPS of 92. 46 is obviously a bit lower than the 47 that the RTX 3070 got, but that could be margin of error as well. However, the average frame rate is a bit higher than the 3070 and slightly lower than the 3080, which is kind of what we would expect. In Far Cry 5, the 3070 Ti got a 1% low of 98 FPS and an average FPS of 134. That's slightly higher again than the 3070, but well below the RTX 3080 in comparison. So again, kind of leaning more towards the 3070 in that case. And at 4K, we see kind of the same deal here. It only got 6 FPS more on average than the RTX 3070, but was quite behind the 3080, getting an average FPS of 99. And for the record, I should just briefly note that we also have 3080 Ti and 3090 numbers in here, and they're just kind of crushing the 3070 and 3070 Ti, which isn't really much of a surprise. In Borderlands 3 at 1440p, the RTX 3070 Ti got a 1% low of 73 and an average FPS of 93, whereas the RTX 3070 scored 67 frames per second for its 1% low and 88 FPS on average. The RTX 3080 got a 1% low of 85 FPS and an average FPS of 115. So once again, we're seeing the 3070 Ti kind of taking a back seat here, definitely trailing behind the 3080 significantly, I would say, at this point. I mean, its average FPS here was, it only got 5 frames. It rendered 5 more frames than the RTX 3070, but it was behind the RTX 3080 by 22 frames, which is quite a difference. So something to bear in mind there. Borderlands 3 at 4K, we have the RTX 3070 Ti getting a 1% low of 45 and an average FPS of 53 versus the RTX 3070, a 1% low of 42 and an average FPS of 50. And then our RTX 3080 soaring ahead at 57% or 57 FPS for the 1% low, and on average it got 68 frames per second. The trend continues in the Division 2 at 1440p, with the RTX 3070 Ti getting a 1% low of 70 FPS and an average frame rate of 96. The RTX 3070 scored 68 frames for its 1% low and 92 frames per second on average, and the RTX 3080 got a 1% low of 75 frames and an average frame rate of 115. At 4K, the 3070 Ti got a 1% low of 44 and an average FPS of 55, whereas the RTX 3070 got a 1% low of 38 frames and 52 FPS on average. RTX 3080, 55 for the 1% low and 68 frames on average as well. So again, this is like a really measly bump up from the 3070, only a 3 FPS increase at 4K, which is kind of surprising because you would think as the resolution scales and the game gets more GPU bound that you'd start to see the performance of these cards separate a bit more, but it looks like it really hasn't done that much between the 3070 and the 3070 Ti compared to how it performed at 1440p in the Division 2. Next up, we have Control. At 1440p, the RTX 3070 Ti got a 1% low of 76, an average FPS FPS of 90 versus the RTX 3070 getting an average frame rate of 83 and a 1% low of 71. The RTX 3080 got a 1% low of 90 and an average frame rate of 109. This is one of the few titles tested where the 3070 Ti seems to be split right in the middle between the two GPUs adjacent to it, both in terms of performance and price. And at 4K, we see a similar trend here with the RTX 3070 Ti getting a 1% low of 40 and average FPS of 46 versus the RTX 3070 getting a 1% low of 32 and an average FPS of 42. RTX 3080 49 for the 1% and 57 frames on average. The last game I tested was Dirt 5, and here we see the RTX 3070 Ti once again delivering some marginal gains over the RTX 3070 with a 1% low of 74 frames per second and an average FPS of 87 versus the RTX 3070 getting 69 for the 1% low and 82 FPS for the average frame rate. RTX 3080 got a 1% low of 88 and an average FPS of 105. Pulling well ahead of the 3070 Ti and the 3070. Not much changes when we go up to 4K in Dirt 5. 3070 Ti getting a 1% low of 51 and average frame rate of 58. Not much higher than the RTX 3070 scores of 48 FPS for the 1% low and 54 on average. When you look at the RTX 3080, just kind of smokes both of those cards, puts them in their place, 1% low of 63 and an average FPS of 72. Now let's total up all the frames rendered across all 6 of the titles that we tested to see how each of these cards stack up against each other in terms of percentage, with the RTX 3070 being the 100% benchmark. And this is at 1440p. The 3070 rendered 579 frames in total versus just 599 on the 3070 Ti, giving us a measly 4% bump over the 3070. Not super impressive there. The RTX 3080, however, sees a sizable gain over the 3070 and the 3070 Ti, scoring or actually delivering about 20% more performance than the RTX 3070. And as you might have guessed, the 3080 Ti and RTX 3090 soar well ahead of the pack with 128% and 132% more performance than the 3070 respectively. At 4K, the RTX 3070 rendered 361 frames in total versus 384 frames on the 3070 Ti, giving us a 6% bump over the 3070. Again, nothing to write home about here. And it was actually kind of surprising. I was expecting it to be a little bit closer in performance with the 3080. I mean, maybe, you know, an 8 to 10% bump would have been nice, even though that's still not a lot. I mean, 5-6% is hardly anything to get excited about. The RTX 3080, however, getting 27% faster performance than the 3070 on average, with the RTX 3080 Ti scoring 139% and the 3090 at 145%. So what this tells me is that from what I've tested today, as far as I can tell from the games that I've, you know, benchmarked and stuff, the 3070 Ti is essentially giving you roughly 4 to 6% more performance in games, whether you're talking about 1440p or 2160p, aka 4K, for about 20% more monies. And that's at MSRP. Chances are you're probably gonna pay more than 20% more for it, you know, over an RTX 3070 non-Ti if you're buying it scalped or secondhand, just because everything's just stupid right now. So if you really want my professional tech tuber opinion on whether or not 6% gains is worth a 20% price hike, no. I don't believe it is. And I think I'd be hard pressed to find anyone who does think that. This is kind of a similar conclusion to my RTX 3080 Ti review and just that card in general, which is it's not a whole lot faster than the RTX 3080, but it's a whole lot more expensive. And I feel like with the 3070 Ti, it's just more of the same. It's actually worse. Worse of an upgrade from the 3070 than the 3080 Ti is from the 3080, because I believe the 3080 Ti was at least performing a bit more than 5 or 6% over the RTX 3080. However, it is probably, I think it is more than 20% more expensive too. So I haven't done the math, but it's the 3070 Ti is either equally a bad deal or worse of a bad deal than the 3080 Ti is when you've got options like the 3080 and the 3070. In reality, however, you don't really have any options, or if you do, they're very limited and very expensive. So a lot of what I'm saying today in this video doesn't really matter, but I guess it's nice to pretend like I'm doing a normal GPU review for once. So, I don't know, you guys let me know what you think. I mean, I already know what you think, but feel free to let me know anyway. You might surprise me, who knows. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Toss a like on it before you go. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next one.